On August 26, 2024, a U.S. Coast Guard team was conducting a routine patrol 15 miles offshore off the coast of California. It was supposed to be an ordinary training exercise they had done many times before. Lieutenant Jason McCall was in charge, a seasoned officer leading a team of 5, including Petty Officer Sam Henderson, Seaman First Class Mike Daniels, and 2 recruits, Sarah Jenkins and Tom Bradley. Their mission was straightforward: practice rescue drills, prepare for emergencies, and ensure the crew's readiness for real-life situations. The day started uneventfully, with the crew reviewing procedures, checking equipment, and running drills. They were operating near an area known for its rich marine life. The waters off the coast of California are home to various aquatic animals, including seals, dolphins, and great white sharks. The area near the Farallon Islands, about 30 miles from their location, was notorious for frequent shark activity, especially during migration seasons. Great whites in this region can grow over 20 feet long and are apex predators known for their powerful attacks and stealthy hunting tactics. Despite knowing these facts, the crew didn't expect any danger. They focused on their exercise and were confident in the safety of the routine. As the drills continued, everything seemed normal, until Petty Officer Sam Henderson noticed something strange. A soft jolt ran through the boat as they bumped into something. He scanned the waters around them, seeing nothing at first. However, a large shadow soon emerged beneath the surface, slowly circling the boat. He alerted Jason, and both recognized the dark outline. It was a great white shark. At first, it seemed like a passing predator, curious but non-threatening. Still, they grew uneasy. The shark didn't swim away. Instead, it started circling the boat more aggressively, its movements tightening as it swam closer. Jason ordered the crew to stay alert, but no one anticipated what came next. The shark suddenly rammed the side of the boat, sending a shockwave through the hull. The crew, unprepared for the impact, stumbled as the boat shook violently. Sam rushed to check for damage while the recruits scrambled to secure themselves. The vessel had sustained a blow, but the extent of the damage wasn't immediately clear. Before they could react, the shark struck again, harder this time. The force of the second impact nearly knocked everyone off their feet. Standing too close to the edge, Mike Daniels lost his balance and was thrown overboard. His fall was sudden and chaotic, splashing into the water as the rest of the crew screamed his name. He surfaced quickly, flailing in the water, trying to grab hold of anything to stay afloat. The shark was already circling, drawn to the movement in the water. The crew moved quickly to throw Mike a life ring, but the shark was closing in faster than anyone expected. Blood from the impact was already spreading in the water, and the predator was relentless. The team had only seconds to pull Mike out before the situation escalated. Jason knew they were in trouble. The shark was not behaving like typical predators in these waters. It seemed more aggressive, deliberately targeting the boat. Sam tried to keep the crew calm, but the panic was growing. With Mike in the water, the danger had become very real. The crew braced for the worst as the shark circled closer, its dorsal fin cutting through the surface like a blade. Mike struggled to stay above the water as the shark made its first pass. The crew could see the predator circling him, its movements controlled and deliberate. The situation was deteriorating quickly. Jason ordered the team to pull Mike back on board, but the shark wasn't giving them time. It lunged at Mike, its powerful jaws snapping shut around his leg. The water turned red as the shark dragged him under, its body twisting violently beneath the surface. For a few moments, Mike disappeared from view. The crew stood frozen, horrified by the scene unfolding before them. Then, miraculously, Mike resurfaced, gasping for air. His leg was severely injured, the blood pouring from the wound into the water, but he was still alive. The shark, however, wasn't done. It was circling for another attack, drawn by the fresh blood and the thrashing movements in the water. The crew threw another life ring toward Mike, desperately trying to pull him out before the shark made its next move. Sam readied a harpoon gun, his hands shaking as he aimed for the shark. He fired, but the shot missed. The shark turned sharply, its dorsal fin visible again as it prepared to strike. Jason and Tom tied a rope and prepared to haul Mike out quickly. Just as they began to pull him in, the shark lunged again, its jaws snapping shut just inches from Mike's arm. The sheer size and power of the great white were overwhelming. The boat rocked as the predator rammed the side again, causing more damage to the hull. Water started to leak into the lower deck, but the crew had no time to deal with it. Their focus was on saving Mike before the shark could finish him off. In a desperate move, Sam fired another harpoon, this time hitting the shark in its side. The predator recoiled, thrashing in the water as the harpoon embedded itself into its thick skin. The shark twisted violently, the water churning around it as it tried to shake off the attack. This gave Jason and Tom the precious seconds to pull Mike out of the water. They dragged him onto the deck, his leg mangled and bleeding heavily. The shark continued to thrash below, but it wasn't finished. It made one last attempt to ram the boat, but the damage was done. With Mike on board, Jason steered the ship toward the shore, trying to outrun the predator. The shark, injured but still relentless, followed them for a few hundred yards before finally retreating into the depths. The boat was damaged, barely holding together as they limped toward safety. Mike lay on the deck, his face pale from shock and blood loss. His leg was a mess of torn flesh and muscle, but the bleeding had slowed. Jason and Sam wrapped the wound tightly, doing their best to keep him stable as they pushed the damaged boat forward. As the coastline appeared in the distance, the crew breathed a sigh of relief. They had survived, but the memory of the attack would stay with them forever. The image of the shark's dark shadow, its sudden attack, and the sight of Mike being dragged underwater were seared into their minds. The routine patrol had turned into a nightmare, one that none of them would forget. In 2002, experienced free divers Jack Thompson and Maya Collins were gearing up for a remarkable underwater adventure in the serene waters of Hanauma Bay. With their extensive preparation, they were poised to explore the vibrant marine life in one of the most beautiful snorkeling spots in the world. Jack and Maya decided to indulge in their diving passion at Hanauma Bay. The bay is known for its beautiful coral formations, as well as an abundance of marine wildlife. After securing their masks and fins, they checked their belt-mounted air tanks explicitly designed for free diving. The tanks were designed to provide just enough air for quick dives, but they had to be careful with their use. As they entered the crystal-clear waters, their world changed. The noise of the beach ceased to exist and was replaced by their rhythmic breathing and distant sounds from underwater creatures. Corals spread beneath them like an alien landscape, vibrant with color and alive with life. Jack took the lead, and his confidence in navigating such an environment was evident in his strokes. Maya was close behind, wide-eyed with amazement as she watched the colorful fish dart between the corals, while the sea turtles glided past. The dive was tranquil and mesmerizing. As they swam deeper, they followed a school's bright yellow tangs and unknowingly reached a less traveled reef area. The water became more relaxed and the corals sparser. An ominous feeling began to settle on them. Jack abruptly stopped as he rounded a corner in the maze of coral. Maya nearly bumped into him. They saw dozens of juvenile sharks in the coral bushes and rocky crevices. Their sleek bodies blended into the sand. It was a nursery for sharks. Jack and Maya exchanged worried looks. They were aware that they had stumbled upon a shark nursery. Mother sharks would have been nearby and in a territory that could have been seen as a threat to the young. A shadow hovered over them as they considered their next move. A large female, probably a mother shark, slowly circled, her movements deliberate and cautious. Jack and Maya were still aware that sudden movement could trigger an attack. They watched as the shark's eyes seemed to assess their every move. Jack pointed to a narrow coral passage, realizing they were in danger. This was their best opportunity to make a quiet retreat. The sharks were on guard and needed to find a way back without causing any more alarm. They began carefully escaping, taking slow, measured breaths to conserve their air supply. Each move was calculated to be as non-threatening as possible. The mother shark circled, her presence constantly reminding them that they were in danger. The urgency of the situation increased as they navigated through the coral corridors. Their air supply was limited, and due to their depth and the complexity of the coral surrounding them, they needed help to reach the surface. Each second spent underwater increased the risk. Their escape became more than a matter of stealth but also survival. They moved like shadows, barely stirring the water, focusing on finding safety. The reef's beauty, once mesmerizing, was now a labyrinth that held them in its silent depths. The shark mother's looming presence remained a constant danger as Jack and Maya navigated cautiously through the coral maze. The passageway was twisted, with its openings decorated with sea anemones. Its branches of coral were also sharp. The divers had to be careful not to harm themselves or the marine life. As their air supply was dwindling between them, tension grew. Every breath they took felt like a clock ticking down their remaining minutes. Maya looked at her gauge and saw that it was dangerously close. She then glanced over to Jack, who seemed to be worried. Jack, who was aware of the urgency, took the lead. His eyes scanned for a safe route that could offer a rapid ascent without further alarming the shark. He remembered an area of the reef they had explored earlier, which might provide a safer route to the surface. He firmly motioned to Maya, telling her to follow him towards a less dense part of the reef, where the water was more apparent and the ascent easier. Sensing their movements, the mother shark increased her vigilance. Her passes became closer and her circling tighter. The shadows cast by the sun overhead on the water alerted her to the presence of the two. Jack and Maya would freeze each time she came near, holding their breath and minimizing their movement until she passed. As they neared the edge of the coral reef, the open ocean beckoned. Jack spotted a column of clear water in the distance, noticeably less populated with marine life, offering an ideal path for a discreet ascent. He checked his remaining breath, barely enough for the effort. Exchanging a reassuring smile with Maya, they both understood the urgency. It was now or never for their ascent to the surface. They seized the opportunity when they saw that the shark was temporarily hidden behind a large coral outcropping. They began their ascent by pushing off from the coral as quietly as possible. Each meter of ascent felt like a struggle, and their lungs were aching for more air. A sudden movement caught the peripheral vision of both halfway up. As the mother shark became aware of their escape from her, she accelerated towards them. Jack's grip was firm as he reached out to Maya and calmed her down. They increased their speed, their bodies streamlined to the resistance of the water. The last few meters were the most terrifying. Above them, the surface shone like a promise of safety. They were desperate for air, and their bodies were urging them to break the surface. But they knew that it was not a good idea to surface too soon for fear of decompression illness. Relief was palpable as they finally broke the water's surface, gasping for breath. The masks were removed and their faces were bathed by sunlight. They looked around. After the ordeal, they could now see the shore. It was a comforting sight. The two slowly approached it, still being cautious. Jack and Maya collapsed on the sand once they reached the shore. Their bodies were exhausted, but their minds were racing with adrenaline. Their eyes were filled with relief, fear, and a newfound appreciation for nature's power. The dive began as an exploration into beauty, but ended in a desperate struggle for survival. They knew that they would dive again, but only with a greater appreciation of the ecosystems and inhabitants of the ocean. They were not only escaping the shark, but also from their complacency when faced with nature's silent and imposing depths. The Great Barrier Reef was bathed in a warm Australian sun, creating shimmering patterns that reflected off the white sands. Liam Baxter led a small group of snorkelers to explore a lesser-known section of the reef. The vibrant colors of the water were teeming with marine life. Liam guided the group expertly with his many years of experience. The snorkelers eagerly followed in their wetsuits and bright colors, admiring the coral structures, the vibrant life, and the busy activity around them. The divers were a mixture of nature lovers and thrill seekers, with cameras ready to capture this underwater spectacle. As they delved deeper into coral reefs, the water became more intense, and the coral formations complexed. Between the coral reefs, fish of all colors darted, and sea turtles glided gracefully. The world beneath the waves was a hidden paradise that held endless wonders, unbeknownst to the group. However, they drifted to a remote area of the coral reef, away from the usual snorkeling routes. Liam checked his GPS after noticing the changes in the current of the water and the types of coral. He was concerned when he realized they were too close to known bullshark territory. Bullsharks are standard on the Great Barrier Reef, but are known for their unpredictable behavior. A large shadow moved below the group as Liam considered their next step. A massive bullshark was visible in the water. Its muscular body easily cut through the water, and its eyes revealed nothing about its intentions. The group's tranquility was shattered. Through snorkels, gasps were muffled, and fearful eyes widened. Liam beckoned everyone to remain calm and close. He knew that panicking would only provoke the shark. Liam's hand signals instructed the group to stay with him and slowly return to the vessel. His calm demeanor soothed the group, yet tensions remained palpable. The shark circled them as they swam back. Each of the loops it made was meticulous and almost curious. Liam watched the shark closely, looking for any changes in its behavior that could indicate an impending threat. The group moved together with deliberate and controlled movements. It was a long way to the boat's safety, so every stroke felt risky. The shark's presence was a stark and unsettling reminder of how unpredictable the ocean can be. The line between admiration and fear blurred as the group navigated through the stunning yet menacing coral reef. The group was intruders in the territory of one of the ocean's most powerful predators. As the bull shark's shadow loomed below, the journey back to their boat was long and slow. The vastness and safety of the ship felt distant. The reef life continued to thrive as they swam. This was a stark contrast to the drama that unfolded at the surface. The group was tightly grouped, and their eyes were occasionally drawn downwards to the shadow below them. The giant, imposing bull shark continued to make slow, deliberate movements, reminding them of the danger of their situation. Liam led with calm urgency and navigated the water with accuracy. His experience on these waters was now their most significant asset. He checked over his shoulder to ensure no one was lost or behind. The dark shark shape was visible in the stark white sand, adding to the surreality of the situation. As they approached the boat, water began to swell slowly, with sunlight penetrating the depths, illuminating coral landscapes below. The beauty of coral reefs was almost mocking compared to their fear. Liam pointed up, signaling their approaching proximity to the boat. He urged everyone to speed up gently to avoid splashing, which could further provoke the follower. As if sensing the group's intent to escape, the shark tightened its circle, making its movements more purposeful. Each member of the group felt their tension rise with each shark pass. The sleek shape cut through the water with a grace that belied its strength. As the boat became visible, the group began to murmur in relief. Liam's look at the stern of the ship quickly stopped the murmur, reminding everyone they were unsafe. The group approached the stern where the latter was silently waiting in the water. Liam lifted the first snorkeler while his eyes were constantly scanning the surrounding water. One by one, the group climbed on board, feeling relieved as they stepped onto the deck and discarded their snorkel gear before collapsing into the benches. Liam was the last person to leave, and he kept an eye on everyone until he knew they were all aboard safely. He climbed out of the water only after he felt his body relax as his feet touched the deck. After being alerted, the boat's skipper started the engine. The sound was a soothing growl in the silence of the ocean. The group gathered around the boat's stern as it began to move. They watched the shadow of a bull shark disappear into the depths. It was no longer interested in the humans now that they were outside its territory. Each person was lost in their thoughts as they processed the experience. Liam briefed the group, his voice steady but his eyes reflecting the intensity of the last hour. He looked each person in the eye, emphasizing the respect that must always be shown to the ocean and all its inhabitants, acknowledging their fortune that day. The sounds of nature, such as the crashing of the waves, the calls of seabirds, and the roar of the ocean, became louder and more intense. As the group disembarked from the ship, their goodbyes were more heartfelt. Their experiences had brought them together profoundly and unexpectedly. The bull shark circle reminded them of the line separating adventure from danger in the vast ocean. The crew of the Northern Spirit had been fishing the cold waters off the coast of Alaska for years. Captain Ed Parker and his experienced crew, Mike Sanderson, Dave Collins, and rookie Josh Taylor, knew these waters well. They had been out for a few days, focused on hauling in the rich supply of salmon that thrived in the region. It was June 15, 2011, and everything had gone smoothly until that morning when a thick fog suddenly enveloped their boat. Alaska's fishing grounds were notorious for unpredictable weather, but the fog initially didn't faze the crew. They continued working, hauling in nets filled with salmon and chatting about what they would do with the catch once they returned to shore. The sea was calm. The only sounds were the hum of the boat's engine and the clattering of the heavy nets as they worked. The Pacific sleeper shark was a common but mysterious presence in these waters. Known for being slow and sluggish, These sharks could grow up to 20 feet long. Unlike faster, more aggressive species, sleeper sharks were scavengers, usually feeding on fish or dead marine animals that drifted into their path. They rarely interacted with humans, and the crew of the Northern Spirit had never worried about them. But they didn't know that sleeper sharks could become far more dangerous if provoked. As the fog thickened, visibility dropped to almost nothing. The crew slowed their work, feeling uneasy as they peered into the mist. Ed kept the boat steady, guiding the crew through, pulling in the last of the nets. Everything was routine until they noticed something strange. Usually filled with salmon, the nets had become heavier than usual, almost as if something massive had gotten tangled. Mike and Dave struggled to pull the nets up, their muscles straining as they heaved them over the side of the boat. When the nets finally broke the surface, their worst fears were confirmed. A massive Pacific sleeper shark had gotten caught in the lines. Its enormous body twisted in the tangled web of ropes, its dark, lifeless eyes staring up at them as it sluggishly tried to free itself. The crew wasn't prepared for this. They had previously dealt with large fish and occasional entanglements, but a shark this size was a different challenge. The shark thrashed weakly in the nets, and the crew knew they needed to act fast before it damaged their equipment beyond repair. Something more disturbing happened as they began working to free the shark. Another shadow appeared beneath the surface, and then another. More sharks were circling the boat, drawn to the commotion and the scent of fish. The fog trapped them in place, and now they were surrounded. The crew's anxiety grew as more sleeper sharks began circling the boat. These sharks were usually docile, but their presence in such numbers was unnerving. Mike, Dave, and Josh worked frantically to untangle the first shark from the nets, but the weight of its massive body was making it difficult. The boat rocked under the strain, and every minute spent wrestling with the nets brought more sharks closer. Captain Ed kept his eyes on the fog-covered horizon, trying to steer them out of the area, but the thick mist made it impossible to navigate properly. They were effectively trapped, and now the sharks were showing signs of aggression. The usually slow-moving predators grew more curious, bumping against the boat's hull and circling tighter. As Mike leaned over the side, trying to free one of the ropes, the shark trapped in the net gave a sudden violent twist. The force nearly pulled Mike into the water, his grip slipping on the wet railing as he struggled to regain his balance. The crew pulled him back just in time, but the danger was becoming more real by the second. The sharks weren't leaving, and the crew's movement agitated them further. One of the larger sharks bumped the boat hard, causing it to rock dangerously. The nets, still tangled with the trapped shark, were in danger of being ripped away completely, which would not only destroy their equipment, but leave them without a catch. Josh, the youngest and most inexperienced crew member, suddenly desperately attempted to free the nets. In his haste, he slipped and lost his footing, tumbling hard against the side of the boat. His legs dangled precariously over the edge, inches from the water. Ed shouted for him to stay still. But before anyone could react, one of the circling sharks surged forward, its massive body brushing against the boat and sending waves splashing over Josh's legs. Panic set in as Mike and Dave grabbed Josh, pulling him back onto the deck. The crew was shaken, knowing how close Josh had come to falling into the water with the sharks. The hammering of their hearts was louder than the eerie silence of the fog. The sleeper sharks continued to circle, and now the trapped shark thrashed harder, making it even more difficult to cut it free without causing more damage. Ed knew they had to get out of the area fast, but the sharks surrounded the boat, and any sudden movement might trigger a full attack. He quickly decided to sacrifice part of the nets. They could lose the catch, but they had to free the shark before it capsized the boat or brought more sharks closer. The crew worked silently, the tension thick in the air as they used a knife to slice through the ropes. The trapped shark broke free with a final cut, disappearing into the depths. Sensing the sudden change, the circling sharks began to drift away, but not without making one last pass near the boat. One of the sharks brushed against the hull, the impact sending a shiver through the deck as if warning them to leave. With the sharks dispersing and the fog still thick around them, Ed guided the boat slowly out of the area, his eyes never leaving the water. The crew was exhausted, their nerves shot from the encounter, but they were safe. They had escaped the threat, but their catch was gone, and the damage to their equipment would take weeks to repair. The Gold Coast in Australia, known for its beautiful beaches and calm waters, was the perfect place for the McAllister family to celebrate their youngest son's birthday. It was January 17th, 1995, a bright summer day, and the family had been looking forward to this day for months. The McAllisters, James, 42, his wife Sarah, 39, and their 3 children, Liam, 16, Megan, 14, and Oliver, who had just turned 9, had rented a small boat for the occasion. They planned to spend the day on the water, swimming, fishing, and relaxing. They had done this before, and the waters of the Gold Coast had always been a source of happiness and tranquility. The boat was small but perfect for a family outing. It had a small cabin and plenty of space to store their fishing gear and picnic supplies. The day had been filled with laughter as they sailed a few miles offshore, still within sight of the coast. Oliver, excited for his birthday, had caught his first fish, and the family had spent hours enjoying the sun and sea breeze. By mid-afternoon, they anchored the boat in a seemingly calm, shallow area to swim quickly before heading back to shore. The waters around Australia, particularly the Gold Coast, were known for great white sharks. These massive predators could reach up to 20 feet in length and were apex hunters, capable of sensing the slightest movement in the water from miles away. While attacks were rare, locals knew the risks, but the McAllisters, like many tourists, weren't overly concerned. The sun was bright, the sea was clear, and the water looked inviting. James had checked the depth and felt confident they were in safe territory. The family gathered on the deck, their voices rising excitedly as they prepared for one last swim before heading home. Liam and Megan were the first to dive into the water, splashing each other and laughing as Oliver waited for his dad to help him into the water. Watching from the boat, Sarah smiled at her children, content in the day's joy. Unbeknownst to them, far below the surface, a great white shark was prowling the waters, drawn by the vibrations of the family's playful splashing. It had been hunting along the coast, and now, sensing potential prey, it moved swiftly, its powerful body cutting through the depths. The shark was massive, nearly 18 feet long, with rows of razor-sharp teeth designed for tearing flesh. It had detected the family from a distance and was now closing in. Without warning, the water around Liam suddenly erupted. One moment he was laughing with his sister. The next he was yanked beneath the surface. A flash of silver and white moved through the water and a scream pierced the air. Megan, just a few feet away, froze in horror as the dark shape of the great white shark became clear. James leaped into the water, frantically swimming toward Liam, who had surfaced briefly, blood streaming from a deep wound in his leg. But before James could reach him, the shark struck again, its massive jaws clamping down on Liam's torso, pulling him under. The water turned red as the shark thrashed violently, shaking its prey with incredible force. Panic swept over the family. Sarah screamed from the boat, trying to grab Oliver, who had been about to jump into the water, while Megan swam back toward the ship in terror, desperately trying to escape the carnage unfolding around her. But the shark wasn't finished. It turned toward Megan in a flash, its black eyes locking onto her. Before she could pull herself back onto the boat, the shark lunged, its powerful jaws catching her by the waist. Megan let out a scream, her hand slipping from the boat's edge as the shark dragged her into the depths. The water around her churned violently, and her small body was no match for the predator's strength. Blood filled the water once again as James tried to reach his daughter. But it was too late. Sarah clung to Oliver, who was now sobbing uncontrollably. His birthday joy turned into unimaginable horror. She watched helplessly as her husband, desperate to save his children, swam toward the chaos. But the shark was relentless. It came back for James, its speed and power overwhelming. With a single, brutal strike, it grabbed him by the legs, pulling him under just as it had done to Liam. The water frothed as the shark twisted and tore at James, his struggles weakening until they stopped. Now only Sarah and Oliver remained. The boat rocked as the shark circled, its dorsal fins slicing through the water, searching for its next target. Sarah knew they had to escape the water, but she was afraid. Her heart raced as she held onto her son, praying for a miracle. But the shark wasn't done. In one final, devastating attack, the shark rammed the side of the boat, knocking Sarah and Oliver into the water. The force of the impact left them disoriented, and the shark struck before Sarah could regain her bearings. Its jaws closed around her midsection, pulling her down with brutal force. Now floating helplessly nearby, Oliver screamed for his mother, but the shark quickly turned its attention to him. In an instant it dragged him under, his small body disappearing beneath the bloodied sea. The Coast Guard, alerted by another nearby boat that had witnessed part of the attack, arrived minutes later. But by the time they reached the scene, the water was still. Only bits of debris and a red stain on the water remained as a silent testament to the unfolding carnage. They could do nothing when the Coast Guard pulled up to the wreckage. The shark had vanished, and the McAllisters were gone, devoured by the ocean's most fearsome predator. Only a few boat pieces remained, drifting aimlessly in the blood-streaked waters. The Gold Coast community was shocked and struggled to comprehend the tragedy. It was a reminder of the untamed power of the sea, where even a day of celebration could turn into a nightmare in a matter of moments. On July 19, 2009, 4 friends, Maria Teixeira, Pedro Santos, Inés Carvalho, and João Almeida, arrived in the Azores for what was supposed to be the vacation of a lifetime. The archipelago, located off the coast of Portugal, is famous for its beautiful landscapes and pristine waters filled with marine life. After a few days of sightseeing, they decided to book a snorkeling tour to explore the ocean up close. They were excited, expecting to swim with fish and maybe catch a glimpse of dolphins. That morning, the group boarded a small boat with a local guide who assured them the waters were safe and calm. The ocean was inviting, the sky clear, and the friends could hardly wait to dive in. Their guide led them to a spot just off the coast of Fayal Island, a well-known location for snorkeling due to its crystal-clear water and vibrant coral. The guide briefly mentioned that sharks were sometimes seen in the area, but were usually harmless blue sharks, more curious than dangerous. Blue sharks are common in the waters surrounding the Azores. They are sleek, fast swimmers and generally considered non-aggressive towards humans. They feed mostly on squid and small fish. However, their curiosity can sometimes lead to closer encounters with snorkelers and divers, particularly when attracted by the movements and sounds of boats. This particular day, a blue shark had been circling near the area, drawn in by the disturbance of the boat's engine and the splashes from the group as they entered the water. The group donned their snorkeling gear and dove in, laughing and marveling at the colorful fish darting around them. Maria swam ahead, pointing out a school of fish to the others, while João floated nearby, taking in the beauty of the underwater world. Everything seemed perfect, and the experience was exactly what they had hoped for. But not far beneath them, the blue shark was watching. It approached slowly, curious about the sudden activity. At first, the shark maintained its distance, but as the group continued to swim and splash, it became bolder, moving closer with each pass. João was the first to notice the shadow below and gestured to the others, but they brushed it off, assuming it was just another fish. As they swam farther from the boat, the shark's behavior changed. It began to circle tighter, its sleek body moving more aggressively. Pedro, who had been enjoying the swim, felt anxious as he noticed the shark approaching. It wasn't just passing by, it was coming toward them. Panic set in when the blue shark made its first rapid approach. It darted straight toward Pedro, veering away at the last second, its tail brushing against his leg. The close encounter sent a wave of fear through the group as they realized they were no longer alone. Inés screamed into her snorkel, frantically trying to swim back toward the boat. João, now seeing the shark's size and speed, grabbed Maria's arm, urging her to follow. The shark was circling faster now, its curiosity replaced by predatory instinct. It swam directly beneath the group, its dark shape clear in the water, and then shot upward toward Maria. She saw it too late. The shark's sharp snout struck her side, knocking her off balance as she struggled to regain control of the water. Pedro shouted for everyone to stay together, but the group was already scattered in the chaos, trying to swim for safety. The shark made another pass, this time targeting João. It swam close enough for him to feel the rush of water as it brushed past. His heart pounded as he kicked furiously, trying to reach the boat. But the ship, which had seemed so close just moments before, now felt impossibly far. The shark wasn't backing off, it was hunting, and the danger increased every second they stayed in the water. Inez, struggling to keep up with the others, saw the shark's dorsal fin cut through the surface. Her breaths came in short, panicked bursts as she tried to swim faster. But the shark was faster still. It circled back, coming up from below and ramming into Pedro, its teeth grazing his leg. Blood clouded the water around them as Pedro cried out in pain, his leg throbbing from the shark's bite. With Pedro injured and the shark growing more aggressive, the group had no choice but to fight back to the boat. João grabbed Maria and pulled her toward the ship, shouting for Pedro and Inez to follow as fast as possible. The shark was relentless, its sleek body cutting through the water as it made another pass, this time closer to Inez. She kicked hard, desperate to escape its reach. Pedro, bleeding and exhausted, struggled to keep swimming. His leg was slowing him down and he could feel the shark getting closer again. The pain from the bite was overwhelming, but he couldn't stop. In a desperate effort, João grabbed Pedro's arm and dragged him toward the boat. Sensing its prey slipping away, the shark lunged, its jaws snapping shut inches from Pedro's foot. With one last burst of energy, the group reached the boat. Finally realizing the danger, the guide pulled them aboard, their bodies trembling from the adrenaline and fear. As they collapsed onto the deck, gasping for breath, the blue shark circled the boat once more before disappearing into the deep, leaving only the memory of its attack behind. The dream vacation had turned into a nightmare, but they had survived. The shark's cold eyes and relentless pursuit would haunt them, but they knew they were lucky to have escaped. It was June 7, 1996, a day that had started with bright skies and calm seas off the Bahamas coast. It was supposed to be a routine trip for Robert Darnell and his crew. Robert, 46, an experienced sailor, had set out with his brother Daniel and their two friends, Jack Monroe and Steve Callahan, on a week-long sailing adventure. They had planned to explore the remote islands in the Caribbean, taking in the beauty of the ocean. Their boat, the Sun Chaser, had been sturdy enough for the journey, or so they thought. The first few days went smoothly, the men bonding over shared stories, fishing, and enjoying the calm, open waters. They had been friends for years, often taking trips like this together to escape their daily routines. The boat had all the needed supplies, and they felt confident navigating through these waters. But the weather turned without warning. A sudden violent storm hit them late afternoon, far from any coastline. Dark clouds gathered quickly, the wind howled and the waves grew large, brutally crashing against the boat. The crew scrambled to control the sails, but the storm was relentless. The Sun Chaser was tossed around like a toy in the angry sea, and within hours their worst fear came true. The boat capsized. Water poured into the cabin, and the men barely had time to grab a life raft and some emergency supplies before the boat sank beneath the surface. The storm raged on, but they had no choice but to climb into the small inflatable raft and hold on. Their boat was gone, leaving them adrift in the open ocean, and they did not know how long it would be until they were rescued. The sea calmed as the storm finally passed, but they faced a new challenge. They were stranded miles from shore, with no food or water except for a small amount in their emergency kit. The scorching sun beat down on them and dehydration set in quickly. The vastness of the ocean around them was both beautiful and terrifying. No sign of land or any ships could come to their rescue. For the first day, they remained hopeful. They rationed their water, keeping their spirits up as best they could. But as the hours dragged on, the reality of their situation became clear. They were alone, floating in the endless blue, and their chances of survival grew slimmer with each passing moment. Then, on the second day, they noticed the fins. Oceanic white-tip sharks, known for their curiosity and aggressiveness, were common in these waters. Unlike many sharks, which typically avoid humans, the oceanic white-tip was known to be bold, especially when hungry. These sharks were opportunistic predators, and shipwreck survivors had often reported encounters with them. For Robert and his crew, the sight of the fins cutting through the water sent a chill through their already exhausted bodies. At first, the sharks simply circled the raft from a distance, watching the men with dark, unblinking eyes. There were 3 of them, their large bodies gliding effortlessly through the water. The sailors tried to remain calm, knowing that panicking would only worsen things. But as the hours passed, the sharks grew bolder, swimming closer to the raft, their fins cutting through the water rapidly. By the 3rd day, the sharks were no longer just circling. They began bumping the raft, testing its strength, their powerful bodies pushing against the small inflatable craft. Robert and the others could feel the impacts each time a shark made contact, their hearts pounding as they realized how fragile their situation had become. The sharks were hungry, and their patience was wearing thin. The men tried to scare the sharks away by banging on the raft's sides with their makeshift paddles, but the predators were relentless. The smell of the men, weak and sweating under the heat, had drawn them in, and the sharks wouldn't leave without a fight. The crew knew they had to act fast. They fashioned crude weapons out of pieces of metal they had managed to salvage from the boat's wreckage, sharpening the ends as best they could. The first attack came just after noon. One of the sharks, larger than the others, launched at the raft, its powerful jaws clamping down on the side. The men screamed in horror as the shark's teeth tore into the rubber, puncturing the raft and sending water splashing into the boat. Robert grabbed one of their makeshift weapons and stabbed at the shark's head, striking it several times before it let go. Blood filled the water, but it wasn't enough to kill the shark, only to anger it. The shark thrashed wildly in the water, and the other two sharks began circling faster, sensing the chaos. Jack was the next to strike, jabbing at one of the approaching sharks as it came too close, its fin brushing against the side of the raft. The men were exhausted, their arms heavy, but adrenaline kept them going. They fought with everything they had, knowing one more breach could sink them, but the sharks were relentless. As the sun began to set, the men knew they couldn't keep this up much longer. Their raft was slowly taking on water, and the sharks showed no signs of retreating. Desperation set in as they realized that night was falling, and their chances of survival would be even lower in the dark. Suddenly, one of the sharks lunged again, aiming for Steve, who had been leaning too far over the raft's edge. The shark's massive jaws clamped down on his leg, terrifyingly pulling him into the water. Steve screamed, thrashing in the water as the shark tore into him, his blood mixing with the ocean as the other sharks moved in for the kill. Robert and Daniel tried to pull him back into the raft, but it was too late. The sharks were too fast, too strong. Steve's body disappeared beneath the surface, and the water around them turned red. The remaining three men watched in horror, their minds barely able to process what had just happened. The sharks continued to circle, but now the men knew they were next. The ocean had become a battleground, and they were losing. They fought off the sharks as best they could, but exhaustion and fear had taken their toll. With night approaching, they knew they wouldn't last much longer. When the Coast Guard finally found them, the raft was barely afloat. Robert, Daniel, and Jack were pulled from the water, weak and delirious, their bodies covered in wounds from the sharks' relentless attacks. Steve was never found. The ocean had claimed him, and the sharks had left only a bloody memory behind. The sailors would live to tell their story, but the scars, both physical and emotional, would remain with them forever. The ocean, once their playground, had turned into a nightmare, and the sight of a fin cutting through the water would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The annual surf competition in South Africa was underway on a sunny, bright day in 2006. As surfers displayed their skills, the beach was lined up with spectators. Their cheers filled the air. Emily Harris, 20, is a rising surfing star known for her fearless spirit and bold maneuvers. The atmosphere was electric as each surfer pushed themselves to the limit to impress the judges. Emily was next. Her heart pounded with excitement and nervousness as she paddled into the lineup. She waited patiently for the perfect wave. The announcer's voice cracked over the loudspeaker with a tone of urgency. "Attention, spectators and surfers. Satellite images just revealed a massive rogue swell approaching from the southeast. Please prepare yourself for possible evacuation." The horizon darkened before anyone could react as the massive wave inched closer, increasing with each passing second. As surfers paddled frantically towards the shore, Emily was caught in the swiftly approaching wave. The rogue wave swept Emily and her board in a swirling water storm. The force of the waves disoriented her, and she struggled to keep her bearings. Emily surfaced, gasping for breath when the wave receded. Her board was still attached to her ankle with the safety leash. Emily realized she was far from the competition zone as she wiped salt water from her eyes. She could not hear the cheers or announcements from the crowd. The coast was just a faint line in the distance. She floated alone in the vast ocean. Emily, trying to remain calm, scanned the area. She was horrified to discover that she had entered a shark feeding area. The water was darker and signs of a sudden drop on the ocean bottom were visible through the clear waters. She was horrified as she recalled the stories about great whites patrolling this area. She floated in the water waiting for assistance to arrive. A dark shape caught her attention. Untethered, a large fin cut through the surface of the water. The great white shark was now in her midst, probably attracted by the commotion of the waves. Emily's training kicked into gear. She knew that sudden movements could trigger an attack. She used her hands to stabilize her position gently and measured her movements. Emily knew the chaos caused by the rogue waves would delay rescue, so she knew she needed to use her surfing skills and wits to survive. She placed her board to be as visible from the air as possible while watching the shark's movements. She prayed for help as each pass felt like an eternity. The situation was grave. Emily was alone, far from safety and surrounded by an infinite sea. Her life hung in the balance when she faced the ocean's most formidable predator. Emily's challenge was to survive the shark and maintain hope and courage despite overwhelming fear. Her mind was racing with solutions. She remembered that she had read that keeping eye contact with the shark can sometimes deter them since they are used to attacking unwitting prey. In this light, she kept her gaze on the shark and made herself as large as possible on her board. After the initial shock of being alone began to fade, her skills as a surfer became more apparent. Emily used her water current knowledge to subtly and slowly maneuver her board toward a nearby coral reef she had previously noticed. The reef could provide some shelter, making it more difficult for the sharks to approach. The sun started sinking towards the horizon, casting a golden glow on the water. The beauty of that moment contrasted with the terror she felt. Emily was a mixture of fear and awe, with her life hanging in the balance between both. She heard the distant hum from an engine. She squinted in the sun, trying to find the source. The rescue jet ski was part of the safety crew for the competition, and it was speeding toward her. Emily waved her hands frantically to get the driver's notice while still keeping an eye on that shark. The jet ski driver navigated the turbulent waters with ease. Emily saw the relief in the eyes of the rescuer as he approached, a reflection of her relief. He shouted above the engine's roar, assuring her they would get her out of the situation. Considering the shark's proximity, Emily carefully shifted weight to get on the jet ski. He helped her to the surface with a firm but reassuring grip. She had barely settled behind him when he began to accelerate away, his powerful engine cutting the waves on their return. Emily could feel the tension leaving her body as the shore approached. As they saw Emily safely return, the crowd gathered on the beach cheered. Her competitors ran to her and greeted her with relief and admiration. Emily's gratitude was overwhelmed when she finally reached solid ground. The sun was setting, and the colors of the sky were orange and purple. Emily turned back to the ocean. It was the most terrifying experience of her life. But it also reinforced her awe and respect for the sea, a powerful, unpredictable force. Emily's story quickly spread that night as the competition ended and participants celebrated. It was a testament to Emily's courage and her survival. She understood that the ocean was a constant in her life and the need to respect it. Her encounter with the white shark will forever serve as a reminder of how thin the line is between adventure and danger. Waters off Durban, South Africa coast had always been a favorite spot for seasoned spearfisher Paul Mitchell. On March 18, 2003, Paul, a 35-year-old with over a decade of spearfishing experience, was preparing for what he expected to be a successful day in the ocean. The South African coastline, known for its rich marine life, was home to an array of fish species and, as every diver knew, some of the ocean's largest predators. But Paul was confident, skilled, and had faced his share of close encounters. That day, he was accompanied by his longtime friend and fellow spearfisher, Greg Ellis. The two had been diving together for years, relying on each other for safety in deeper waters. Paul was the more experienced of the two, but Greg had learned quickly, becoming a strong partner on these trips. Their plan for the day was simple: dive deep, target larger fish, and return with a solid catch before the afternoon heat kicked in. The sun was already rising when they reached their favorite dive spot. The water was clear, with perfect visibility and mild currents. They geared up, adjusted their weight belts, checked their spears, and descended into the water. Paul led the way, his body moving effortlessly through the depths, the spear gun ready. His heart raced with the familiar thrill of the dive, and his mind focused on the task. Paul had chosen this spot because it was known for its rich population of game fish, particularly yellowfin tuna. The deeper waters here could be challenging, but they had always yielded good results, and today they seemed the same. As they descended, fish darted in and out of view, their bodies reflecting the light filtering through the water. After a few minutes of scouting, Paul spotted his target, a large tuna hovering just above the seabed. He signaled to Greg to stay back as he slowly raised his spear gun. The shot was perfect. The spear pierced the fish cleanly, and Paul felt the familiar tug as the fish tried to escape. Blood immediately spilled into the water, spreading quickly as Paul began pulling the catch toward him. His adrenaline spiked, the satisfaction of the perfect shot filling him with confidence. But beneath the surface, the ocean's predators were already responding to the scent of blood. Durban's waters were home to various shark species, and tiger sharks were among the most feared. Known for their size, strength, and aggression, tiger sharks were opportunistic hunters, attracted by movement and the scent of blood in the water. Paul had always respected the dangers of these waters, but today, the reality of the threat was about to become far more personal. As Paul wrestled with the tuna, he didn't notice the dark shape gliding silently through the water. The tiger shark had been lurking nearby, drawn by the blood cloud from Paul's recent kill. Its senses were finely tuned, detecting the slightest disturbance. And now, it was closing in. Paul felt a shift in the water before he saw the shark. A powerful current surged past him, and he instinctively looked around, his heart skipping a beat as his eyes locked onto the unmistakable silhouette of a tiger shark. It was massive, easily over 12 feet long and heading straight for him. Panic gripped him momentarily, but his years of training kicked in. He knew exactly what to do. He released the line from his spear gun, letting the tuna drift away as a distraction. But the shark wasn't interested in the fish. It was focused on Paul, sensing both the blood and the movements of a new target. Paul's hand tightened around his spear as he began his ascent, kicking hard toward the surface, but he could feel the shark getting closer, its massive body slicing through the water with terrifying speed. Paul's mind raced. He knew the tiger shark was not a creature that would scare off easily. It was known for its persistence, especially once it had locked onto prey. He turned to face the shark, holding the spear gun out in front of him as a makeshift shield. The shark came in fast, its wide mouth lined with rows of sharp teeth visible as it closed the distance. With a sudden jolt, the shark struck. Its powerful head slammed into Paul, knocking him backward. The force of the impact sent him spiraling through the water, but he managed to keep hold of his spear gun. He kicked out, trying to distance himself, but the shark was relentless. It circled back, faster now, its eyes locked onto him as it prepared for another strike. Paul knew he had to act quickly. He aimed the spear gun at the shark's head, waiting for the right moment. As the shark lunged again, he fired. The spear struck just below its eye, not deep enough to kill, but enough to startle it. The shark thrashed, violently shaking its massive head. The spear lodged in its tough skin. Blood mixed with the water as the shark pulled back, disoriented for a moment. Paul didn't wait to see if the shot had done any lasting damage. He kicked upward with everything he had, his lungs burning as he raced toward the surface. The shark, though injured, wasn't giving up. It circled beneath him, slower now, but still dangerous. Paul could feel the water moving as the shark swam below him, and he knew it was only a matter of time before it attacked again. Greg was already there as he broke the surface, gasping for air, pulling him toward the boat. Paul scrambled aboard, his body shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. They watched in horror as the shark's dorsal fin broke the surface, circling the boat for several more minutes before disappearing into the depths. Paul collapsed onto the deck, his breathing heavy, his heart racing. The close encounter had shaken him to his core. In all his years of spearfishing, he had never come face to face with such danger. The tiger shark had been relentless, and Paul knew he had been lucky to escape with his life. The day had started like any other for Simon Garrett, a professional diver with years of experience exploring the Great Barrier Reef. It was April 14, 2007, and Simon was alone, investigating a remote section of the reef known for its deep caves and narrow passages. The Great Barrier Reef, located off the northeastern coast of Australia, was one of the most breathtaking places Simon had ever dived. He had spent hours navigating its coral gardens and underwater tunnels, fascinated by the marine life that thrived there. On this particular day, Simon had chosen a new spot that he hadn't explored before. It was deeper, more isolated, and less frequented by tourists. The water was calm, and conditions were perfect for a long, quiet dive. Simon checked his gear, adjusted his mask, and descended into the blue. The familiar sensation of weightlessness took over as he swam downward. His air tank was full, and his dive computer showed plenty of time for exploration. He had always felt at peace in the water. The reef was like a second home to him, and Simon was confident in his abilities. His goal for the day was to explore a cave system hidden beneath layers of coral, rumored to be full of beautiful, untouched marine life. He ventured deeper, his flashlight cutting through the shadows as he entered the first tunnel. The coral walls shimmered, and schools of fish darted around him, making the cave come alive with movement. As Simon moved through the narrow passages, he took in the beauty of the place, losing track of time. Everything felt routine until he noticed something in the distance. A dark shape moved in the shadows ahead, just on the edge of his flashlight's beam. At first, Simon thought it might be a large fish or a stingray, but as he swam closer, he realized what it was. A reef shark resting in the narrow space, hidden among the coral. Reef sharks were common in the Great Barrier Reef. Unlike the more aggressive bull or tiger sharks, reef sharks were usually shy, often keeping their distance from divers. But they were also territorial, especially when disturbed in confined spaces like the cave Simon was now swimming through. Simon froze, his heart racing as the shark stirred, its sleek body shifting slightly in the tight space. The shark had been unaware of Simon's presence until now, but the disturbance was enough to set it on edge. The shark's movements became quicker, more erratic, and Simon knew he had to tread carefully. In the narrow confines of the cave, there was little room for error, and the shark now blocked the only exit. Simon's mind raced as he tried to stay calm. He knew sudden movements could provoke the shark. There was no way to swim around it in such a tight space. The shark turned slowly, its dark eyes fixed on Simon. It was a large one, at least 6 feet long, and its powerful body moved with grace, sending a wave of fear through him. Then, without warning, the shark charged. It moved with terrifying speed, its body slicing through the water toward Simon. He barely had time to react, pulling himself back against the cave wall, his heart pounding in his chest. The shark rushed past him so close he could feel the force of its movement. It didn't strike him, but its behavior was clear. It felt threatened, and Simon was trapped in its territory. The shark circled back, slower this time but still agitated. Simon's breathing became shallow as he tried to control his panic. His air supply was ticking down, and he knew he couldn't stay in the cave much longer. He had to find a way out before the shark attacked again. His spear gun, which he always carried for protection, was strapped to his side, but using it in such close quarters could provoke the shark further. Simon decided it was a last resort. The shark circled once more, its body gliding just inches from Simon as it passed. It was watching him, testing him, and Simon knew that any wrong move could trigger another charge. He slowly reached for his spear gun, keeping his movements as controlled as possible. The shark stopped circling, hovering before the exit, blocking his only way out. Simon's breathing became more rapid as the tension mounted. He was running out of options, and the shark wasn't moving. If he didn't act soon, he'd be out of the air with no clear escape. Taking a deep breath, Simon made his move. He pushed off the cave wall with a quick burst of energy, swimming toward the shark, hoping to spook it without forcing a confrontation. The shark reacted instantly, turning toward Simon with lightning speed, but instead of charging again, it darted away, its powerful body disappearing into the deeper water beyond the cave. Simon didn't waste a second. He swam as fast as he could toward the exit, his lungs burning as he kicked hard, pulling himself through the narrow opening. Once free from the cave, Simon ascended quickly, his chest tightening as his air supply dwindled. He broke the surface with a gasp, his body trembling from the adrenaline and the fear of what had just happened. The open water felt like a refuge, and he floated on his back momentarily, catching his breath and trying to process the terrifying encounter. Back on the boat, Simon sat quietly, replaying the event in his mind. He had come face to face with a reef shark in one of the most confined and dangerous situations imaginable, and lived to tell the tale. With all its beauty and wonder, the Great Barrier Reef also showed Simon how quickly things could go wrong. The ocean was a place he loved, but it was clear to him now that it held dangers he would never fully control. It was 2008, and Rachel Anderson was on the sunlit beaches of Fiji, ready to dive into the sea. The Mamanuca Islands and their surrounding sea shimmer in turquoise and teem with coral reef life. Rachel's job as a marine biologist had been to study such ecosystems, peer under every rock and crevice of the waves, and find all the secrets buried by the liquid blue. Fiji's rich biodiversity and coral gardens set an ideal scene for her most recent research. That day, Rachel was donning her wetsuit, going over the equipment with a fine-tooth comb before entering the still, transparent water. Her heart raced as she dropped further into the darkness. The sun filtered down from above into the caverns of the coral below. Many multicolored fish accompanied her, while bright corals swayed lightly in the current. This was her paradise. Rachel drifted with the current over the reef, taking detailed notes on the species of coral she passed by, and admiring their ability to resist climate change. However, the corals had her too preoccupied to notice one thing down in the crevices: lots and lots of giant moray eels. The moray eel stood with its long body and toothy smile different from the rest. Usually shy, they became hostile when cornered. As Rachel had been so engrossed, she had reached forward in her studies, jostling the eel's rocky hide slightly. The eel charged out of its lair in a cloud of silt. The adrenaline kicked in, alert to Rachel as though sensing danger. It was over instantly. The serene subaqueous landscape was a scene of turmoil. Swiftly, a rush and the moray eel exploded from its hole, its gaping mouth an inch from Rachel's arm. Lightning fast, more so than she could react, the eel tightly wound its long, thin, serpentine body around her. Panic seized Rachel. She desperately struggled for her freedom, where she had been on a peaceful dive only moments before. Rachel's training as a marine biologist took over. She remembered the actions of the moray eels. They bite when cornered. The fight-or-flight urge surged, but she realized that panic would only worsen her situation. So instead, she began to breathe and tried to remain calm in the face of the mounting tide of fear. Rachel was sure that a long time would pass with her arm trapped before her head could think again. She suddenly remembered the anatomy of eels. Their jaw structures are meant to grasp and hold rather than crush. That meant she could get free if she found some way to loosen its grip. Girding up her loins, she started wiggling about her arm to create space between the skin and the fearsome jaws of the eel. The moray eel sensed her movement, and it tightened its grip. Rachel knew the pressure was increasing, but she would not lose hope. All of a sudden, she remembered the small knife she always carried around her waist. It was for emergency purposes. With a quick twist, Rachel reached for the knife and her fingers touched the handle. It was a risk, but she had to try. Rachel drew her knife and held it toward the eel's body. She didn't want to hurt the creature. She just needed to disorient it as a means of escape. Pressing the blade to the side, she jerked hard, and the eel, taken by surprise, momentarily loosened its grip. Rachel jumped on the chance, yanked her arm free, and swam away from the aperture, her legs kicking and her heart racing. She swam up toward the surface. Once everything was in order, the water seemed like a sea of turbulence. As she ascended, Rachel turned around, half expecting the eel to follow her, but instead she saw it retreat into its rocky den and melt into the shadows of the reef. Relieved but shaken, Rachel broke the surface, gulping for air, the warm sun shining on her face. She floated there for a second, processing her harrowing adventure and the flood of feelings. Up the very instant she could, Rachel began to swim toward the boat, her mind running a mile a minute. She knew that marine life was unpredictable, but this was something entirely different again. One that made her respect the creatures that lived in the sea all the more. It was a potent reminder that danger lay just beneath the surface of beauty. As soon as she reached the boat, Rachel climbed aboard, and the crew members immediately noticed her pale face and wide eyes. They surrounded her, concern etched on their faces while she related her experience. While they had heard of such encounters before, first-hand witnessing it all left them in awe of the ocean's raw power. Rachel took the experience as a turning point in her career. She became an activist for more marine safety training for divers. Further, she emphasized the need to learn more about animal behavior vis-a-vis their response to humans when people are interacting with them in the wild. Her experience made her see marine biology differently, amalgamating her passion for research with education and safety. That nightmarish encounter with the moray eel had become one of the defining chapters of her life, shaping her role into what she functioned as an ocean saver. She was fascinated and respectful of the ocean, with beauty and unpredictability, mindful that underneath danger lies a world worth defending. It was September 22, 2007, and Tom Garrison was alone on his small lobster boat just off the coast of Maine. The morning had been routine so far, like many before. Tom had been a lobsterman for over 20 years, making a living pulling in traps from the cold waters of the North Atlantic. He knew the waters well, every hidden rock and stretch of coastline familiar to him. The traps were full today, and the catch was promising. So Tom worked efficiently, hoisting the cages from the depths, checking for lobsters, and resetting the traps. The sky was overcast, a typical day for Maine, but the waters were calm enough for a smooth haul. Tom felt comfortable and secure in his routine, paying little attention to the surroundings as he focused on his work. He hummed as he pulled up another cage, heavy with struggling lobsters. He leaned over the edge of his boat to untangle the trap when the ship rocked unexpectedly. At first, Tom thought it was just a strong wave, but then the ship jolted harder this time, nearly knocking him off balance. Puzzled, Tom looked out over the side, and that's when he saw the dark shape circling the boat. It was a bull shark, much larger than any fish he had encountered in these waters. Bull sharks weren't common here, but with warming waters and shifting marine life patterns, they had started showing up more often in New England waters. Bull sharks were aggressive and known for their unpredictable behavior, and this one seemed drawn to the struggling lobsters. Before Tom could react, the shark rammed the side of the boat with alarming force. The ship lurched violently, and Tom scrambled to keep his footing. His heart began to race as the reality of the situation hit him. The shark wasn't just investigating the boat, it was attacking it. Tom had heard stories of sharks becoming aggressive around fishing boats, but he never imagined it would happen to him. Another hit from the shark sent Tom sprawling onto the deck, and before he could get back on his feet, the boat tipped sharply to one side. Suddenly, Tom lost his grip and was thrown overboard, crashing into the icy water below. He surfaced quickly, gasping for air, the cold taking his breath away as the realization of his situation sank in. The bull shark was still circling, drawn by the commotion and the scent of the lobsters in the water. Tom knew he was in immediate danger. Now, rocking without control, the boat drifted away from him, and the shark was closing in. Tom's survival instincts kicked in, and he tried to stay calm, but he could feel the raw fear rising inside him as the predator moved closer. He glanced around, looking for anything that could help. His boat was too far to reach quickly, and the shore was distant, a faint outline through the misty air. The bull shark passed underneath him, its massive shadow sending a jolt of panic through his body. Tom knew that bull sharks were not only fast but also extremely territorial. He had to act fast. Tom kicked his legs, trying to stay afloat, but every movement drew the shark's attention. The water churned as the shark turned sharply, its dorsal fin cutting through the surface as it returned toward him. Tom knew he couldn't outswim it. His only chance was to outmaneuver it. He had spent his life on these waters, and knew erratic movements could distract sharks. He thrashed his arms in the water, creating as much turbulence as possible, hoping to confuse the predator long enough to buy himself some time. The shark circled him closer this time. Tom felt the displacement of water as it swam just beneath him, its powerful body sending waves that rocked him. Then, without warning, the shark lunged. Tom twisted his body, narrowly avoiding the open jaws, but the shark grazed his side, leaving a deep scratch on his leg. The pain shot through him, but there was no time to think about it. He kicked hard, swimming for the boat. The shark wasn't done. It came at him again, this time from below, and Tom felt the force of its body as it rammed into him, pushing him back under the water. He struggled to resurface, his lungs burning as he fought to stay above the surface. The boat drifted farther away, but Tom couldn't focus on that. He had to keep the shark at bay. In desperation, Tom reached out for anything to defend himself. His hands found a piece of debris floating nearby, a wooden plank from his boat. As the shark made another pass, he swung the plank with all his strength, striking the shark on the nose. The shark recoiled, momentarily stunned, but it was far from retreating. Tom knew he had only seconds before it attacked again. Summoning the last of his strength, Tom began swimming toward the boat, the plank still clutched in his hand. The cold water sapped his energy, but he pushed on, knowing it was his only chance. Behind him, the shark circled again, but its movements had slowed, the blow to its nose having thrown it off for the moment. Tom finally reached the side of his boat and hauled himself aboard with every ounce of strength he had left. He collapsed onto the deck, gasping for air, his body shaking from the cold and the adrenaline. The shark passed by the boat, its dark shape visible beneath the surface, before slowly disappearing into the depths. Tom lay on the deck, his leg bleeding and his body exhausted, but he was alive. The bull shark had come terrifyingly close, but he had outlasted it. As he lay there, catching his breath, he realized how close he had come to becoming another story in the news. A reminder that danger could appear without warning, even in the waters he had known his whole life. The icy waters of the Norwegian fjord stretched out in every direction, vast and silent beneath a thin layer of ice. Marine biologist Lars Pedersen had been preparing for this dive for months. He had long been fascinated by the Greenland shark, a deep-sea predator that thrived in these cold, dark waters. The sharks were massive and slow-moving, often living for centuries. Yet little was known about their behavior. Lars had come to study them up close, hoping to capture footage and document one of the ocean's most mysterious creatures. On March 12, 2015, Lars stood at the edge of a hole cut into the ice, preparing to descend into the depths. The day had begun smoothly. Lars had checked his equipment, ensuring his oxygen supply and camera gear were functioning. The temperature was brutally cold, but it was perfect for his research. His goal was to dive deep, observe and record the Greenland shark in its natural environment, far beneath the frozen surface of the Norwegian fjord. The water was freezing as he plunged in, but Lars felt the familiar calm wash over him. The deep blue surrounded him as he descended, his lights cutting through the darkness. He moved slowly, conserving energy and scanning the water for signs of life. After a few minutes, his eyes caught movement below. There it was, a Greenland shark gliding effortlessly in the distance. The shark was massive, its body ancient and covered in scars. Lars hovered silently, watching in awe. Unlike other sharks, Greenland sharks were slow, patient hunters, and Lars had never heard of one attacking a human. He felt safe enough to approach, moving closer with his camera to capture the rare footage. Lars observed the creature for nearly an hour, his body steady as he filmed its slow, deliberate movements. The shark paid him little attention, continuing its quiet patrol of the deep fjord. Lars was thrilled. Everything was going according to plan. Suddenly, his oxygen supply gauge began to flicker. At first, he thought it was a minor glitch, but the readings quickly became erratic. His equipment malfunctioned, and Lars knew he had to ascend quickly before his oxygen ran out. The calm of the dive evaporated, replaced by urgency. He needed to surface, but he had to be careful not to rise too fast or risk decompression sickness. With each kick upward, the water around him churned, creating small disturbances in the previously calm environment. Once indifferent to his presence, the Greenland shark turned its massive head toward Lars. It began to follow, its movements quicker now, responding to the sudden activity. Lars realized with growing fear that the normally slow shark was speeding up, its instincts triggered by his rapid ascent. Lars felt the first wave of panic as he ascended, his heart pounding in his chest. The Greenland shark, once a peaceful shadow in the deep, was now following him, drawn by the disturbance he had created in the water. The shark was moving faster than he had thought possible, closing the distance between them. Lars pushed himself to swim harder, but he could feel the weight of the freezing water and the pressure of the ice above. He had ascended too quickly, and now the shark was locked onto him. Its large, pale eyes focused on his every move. Lars could see the scars along its body, marks of battles fought in the cold depths. The predator's ancient instincts were fully awake now, and Lars realized he was no longer an observer, but a target. As he neared the surface, the reality of his situation hit him harder. The sheet of ice above his head stretched endlessly in all directions, save for the small hole where he had entered. His only escape was that narrow opening, but he had drifted too far from it during his dive. He was trapped beneath the ice with only moments to return to safety. The air in his tank was running low and every second counted. Lars turned sharply, his eyes scanning for the hole in the ice. He kicked as hard as he could, his legs burning from the cold and the effort. But the shark was still there, close behind. It moved with purpose, its massive body cutting through the water effortlessly. Lars's chest tightened as the fear took over. He knew he had to conserve his energy, but the predator's proximity made it impossible to stay calm. The shark surged forward, its head inches from Lars's legs, and he could feel the displacement of water from its movements. He swung his camera equipment desperately, trying to create enough barrier to keep the shark at bay. The shark recoiled slightly, its eyes fixed on the struggling diver. But it wasn't deterred. It was patient, circling Lars in the freezing water, waiting for the right moment. Lars's oxygen was almost gone. His hands trembled as he kicked upward again, his lungs burning from the lack of air. The opening in the ice was still several meters away, but it felt impossibly far. He glanced back to see the shark close in again, its enormous mouth opening slightly as it neared. In a moment of sheer survival instinct, Lars used his camera to shove the shark's snout, startling it just enough to gain a few precious feet of distance. Finally, through the blur of fear and exhaustion, Lars saw the faint light of the hole in the ice. Summoning every ounce of strength left in his body, he propelled himself toward it, his vision dimming as his oxygen supply dwindled. The shark made one last lunge, but Lars reached the surface, bursting through the hole in the ice with a gasp of air. He scrambled onto the frozen surface, shaking uncontrollably from the cold and the terror. Below him, the Greenland shark continued to circle for a moment before slowly drifting back into the depths. Lars lay there, breathing heavily, his mind reeling from the close call. He had faced one of the ocean's oldest predators and survived, but the image of the shark's cold eyes and relentless pursuit would stay with him forever. On a crisp morning in August 2002, a group of friends set out for a kayaking adventure in the pristine waters of British Columbia. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the calm sea. The air was filled with the scent of salt and pine, and the gentle sound of waves lapping against the rocky shoreline created a serene backdrop for the day's journey. The group consisted of 4 friends: Liam Harris, a 34-year-old outdoor enthusiast who had organized the trip; Emma Lewis, a 30-year-old biologist with a passion for marine life; Ben Cooper, a 28-year-old photographer eager to capture the beauty of the wilderness; and Rachel Adams, a 32-year-old teacher looking to unwind from the stresses of the school year. They launched their kayaks from Telegraph Cove, a secluded spot locals favor for its tranquility and abundant wildlife. British Columbia was famous for its rich marine ecosystem, home to seals, sea lions, and various fish species. But the most awe-inspiring residents were the orcas, or killer whales, that roamed these waters. Known for their intelligence and complex social structures, orcas were feared and admired by those who encountered them. As the group paddled into the open water, they marveled at the beauty around them. The sea was a deep blue, mirroring the clear sky above. Emma pointed out a family of seals basking on a nearby rock, while Ben snapped photos of the picturesque scene. The friends chatted and laughed, their spirits high as they embraced the adventure ahead. The date was August 18th, and the day seemed perfect for exploration. The kayakers paddled further from the shore, enjoying the freedom of the open water. With her keen eye for wildlife, Emma spotted the first sign of orcas in the distance, a series of dark dorsal fins breaking the surface. She alerted the group and they all stopped to watch, excited by the prospect of a close encounter with these magnificent creatures. The pod of orcas approached slowly, their sleek black and white bodies moving gracefully through the water. The kayakers felt awe and excitement, knowing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Orcas, known as killer whales, were the ocean's top predators. Despite their name, they rarely posed a threat to humans. However, their size and power commanded respect. Liam, Emma, Ben, and Rachel remained still, hoping to look closer without disturbing the animals. The orcas seemed curious, swimming closer to the kayaks. One particularly young orca caught Emma's attention. It was smaller than the others, likely a juvenile, and appeared more playful. It swam around the group, occasionally breaching the surface and splashing water with its tail. The kayakers were mesmerized by the display and felt privileged to be in the presence of such incredible creatures. Little did they know, the encounter was about to turn dark. The young orca's playful behavior soon became more aggressive. It began nudging Liam's kayak, initially with gentle pushes that grew stronger each pass. Liam tried to keep his kayak steady, but the orca's forceful nudges made it difficult. The group exchanged worried glances, realizing that the situation was becoming dangerous. Emma, with her knowledge of marine life, knew that orcas could be unpredictable, especially young ones who might not yet have complete control of their strength. The group tried to remain calm, hoping the orca would lose interest and swim away. But the juvenile seemed fixated on Liam's kayak, continuing to push and bump it increasingly. The tension in the air was palpable as the friends braced themselves for what might come next. The young orca's behavior escalated quickly. Its playful nudges turned into aggressive shoves, dangerously rocking Liam's kayak. The orca's powerful movements disturbed the water's calm surface, sending waves rippling outward. Liam gripped the sides of his kayak, trying to maintain his balance. But the orca's forceful pushes made it nearly impossible. Emma, Ben, and Rachel watched in growing fear, unsure how to help. They knew that getting too close could also put them in danger. The juvenile orca, seemingly undeterred, rammed Liam's kayak with a sudden burst of energy, tipping it over. Liam was thrown into the cold water, his kayak flipping upside down. Panic surged through the group as they saw Liam struggling in the water. The orca circled, its presence a looming threat. Liam tried to swim towards his overturned kayak, but the orca blocked his path, nudging him with its nose. Each touch was a reminder of the orca's immense power, and Liam's heart pounded with fear. Emma, thinking quickly, signaled to Ben and Rachel to stay back while she paddled towards Liam. She knew they had to act fast to get him out of the water before the orca became more aggressive. The young orca continued to nudge Liam, causing him to gasp for air each time he was pushed underwater. Emma reached Liam and grabbed his arm, pulling him towards her kayak. Sensing the movement, the orca swam closer, its dorsal fin cutting through the water like a knife. Emma's heart raced as she struggled to keep both of them afloat. Ben and Rachel watched helplessly, their kayaks bobbing in the choppy water. Emma desperately tried to drag Liam to her kayak. She held onto him tightly, hoping the orca would back off. But the juvenile orca seemed more determined than ever. It swam around them, creating a whirlpool effect that made it hard for Emma to paddle. The water was now a chaotic mix of waves and foam, each movement of the orca sending ripples of fear through the group. Liam clung to the side of Emma's kayak, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The cold water sapped his strength, and he struggled to stay conscious. Emma knew they couldn't wait any longer. She shouted at Ben and Rachel to paddle towards the shore and get help. They nodded and started swimming with all their might, quick and frantic strokes. Emma kept a firm grip on Liam, her eyes never leaving the orca. The young whale circled them one last time before it seemed to lose interest, perhaps sensing the arrival of more humans. It swam off, leaving the water calm once more. Emma felt relief, but she knew they weren't safe yet. Ben and Rachel reached the shore and alerted a nearby boat. A rescue team arrived within minutes, pulling Liam and Emma to safety. Liam was rushed to the hospital, where he was treated for hypothermia and minor injuries. The group's ordeal had lasted only a few hours, but it felt like an eternity. The kayakers' harrowing experience at Telegraph Cove became a story of survival and the unpredictable nature of wildlife. The young orca's behavior was a stark reminder of the power and unpredictability of the ocean's inhabitants. Liam, Emma, Ben, and Rachel would carry the memory of that day with them forever, their bond strengthened by the shared experience of facing danger together. Michael Turner paddled gently through the calm, icy water as the sun sank behind the rugged mountains in a remote bay of Alaska. The tranquil environment, with its vast stretches of water, dense forests, and occasional cries of an eagle in the distance, offered the perfect escape to the bustle of city life. Michael, a keen outdoorsman, enjoyed these solo trips. He felt a connection to nature and peace that he couldn't find anywhere else. The bay was known for its wildlife and breathtaking views. but it was remarkably tranquil as dusk approached. Night slowly approached as the sky painted itself in shades of orange and lavender. Michael watched the seabirds dive for their food and observed the salmon leaping in the air. He was so engrossed in his surroundings that he forgot about the dangers lurking beneath the surface. This bay in the north was cold and deep. It is home to many marine species, including sharks. Shark encounters are rare, but salmon and other fish can attract curious predators to the shore. Michael was lost in his thoughts and shocked when his kayak suddenly shook. The impact was powerful enough to cause the kayak to tip dangerously one way. He was thrown into the freezing waters before he had time to react. Gasping with shock from the cold water, Michael struggled to find his way. His heart began to pound as he realized how serious his situation was. He was trapped in icy waters with his kayak flipped over beside him. Michael struggled against the cold and the panic that was building. Still, he managed to get up, holding on to the kayak's overturned hull. The dim light made it difficult to see what hit him. The dark figure was a shark. Its dorsal blade cut through the water's surface before disappearing. A wave of fear swept through Michael when he realized that there was a shark nearby. Michael was under time pressure to take action. The cold water was sapping Michael's strength, and nightfall only made his situation more dangerous. He reached out for the kayak with trembling hands and tried to correct it. He was clumsy and frightened, his movements splashing water in the process. Michael's thoughts raced while he worked. Michael knew remaining calm was essential. Any frantic movement could trigger a more aggressive reaction from the shark. Now his survival depended on the ability to think clearly and to paddle safely to shore before the shark turned his curiosity into a hunting expedition. Michael's fingers were numb from the cold, and he gripped the kayak as it flipped over. His breaths were short and ragged. Michael's energy was dwindling with each attempt to turn the kayak around. But he knew that he could not stop. The shark was a constant reminder to him of the danger he faced. Michael used his last bit of strength to push the kayak. It began to slowly turn around, with water pouring down its hull. He steadied his kayak with his hand, careful not to create any more splashes that might draw the shark to him. Michael stopped paddling the kayak once it was stable. He took a breather and tried to calm down his racing heart. He strained his eyes to look for the fin in the darkness. The silence was deafening, only broken by the lapping water and his heavy breathing. The shark appeared to have vanished momentarily, giving him an opportunity. He carefully positioned himself to climb into the kayak. He was careful to move slowly and deliberately, balancing caution and haste. He sat down in the kayak and let relief wash over his body. However, he was still aware of how dangerous it could be. Michael looked at the horizon to find the closest point of land. In the dimming light, the shore appeared far away, but he couldn't help himself. He grabbed his paddle, which was floating nearby, and started paddling as hard as possible. The fear and adrenaline that fueled each stroke kept his eyes darting about, looking for the shark. As he paddled, the sky darkened more, and stars began to illuminate the twilight. As the temperature dropped, his bones became even more chilled. Michael's training told him to keep a steady pace and conserve energy to avoid capsizing. The dark form of the shark suddenly reappeared and cut through the water parallel to his kayak. Michael's heart was pounding as he froze in mid-stroke. The shark was not charging, but its silent, close passes reminded Michael of its unpredictability and power. Michael knew that stopping was out of the question. He took a deep breath and resumed paddling. His strokes were even and controlled. His eyes were fixed on the dark waters. The shark circled, but slowly it lost interest. Its passes became less frequent and eventually stopped altogether. The faint outline of the coast was visible after what seemed like an eternity. Michael felt more relief with every stroke that brought his boat closer to the shore. The sight of land gave him new energy. His body and mind were exhausted from tension. He finally reached the shallows and pulled himself and his kayak to the beach. He collapsed onto the sand and lay down, gazing at the sky and breathing heavily. He knew the danger was over, but would never forget what happened that night. Michael was sure he'd kayak again, but not without a newfound respect for the dangers lurking beneath the surface, even in the calmest waters. He had overcome one of his greatest fears tonight. The experience shook him, but it also made him more appreciative of the unpredictable and wild nature of the ocean. It was July 22, 2005, and the waters off the coast of Nassau, Bahamas, sparkled under the late morning sun. A group of eager tourists had signed up for a snorkeling trip, one of the highlights of any visit to the Bahamas, and the day had started perfectly. The tour group, led by 2 local guides, set out from a small marina on a Coral Dream boat bound for a popular snorkeling spot, known for its crystal-clear waters and abundant marine life. Among the tourists was 29-year-old David Carson, who was visiting from the U.S. with his fiancée, Emma Ward, to celebrate their engagement. It was supposed to be a day filled with beautiful memories. David was particularly excited. He had always been fascinated by the ocean, and the Bahamas was the perfect place to see some of its beauty up close. The couple had been looking forward to this trip for months, and everything about the day felt right. The guides had briefed the group on snorkeling safety, instructing them to stay together and avoid wandering too far from the boat. Bull sharks were known to frequent these waters, and while the chances of an attack were low, the guides emphasized the importance of sticking to the group. Bull sharks, notorious for their aggressive nature and ability to thrive in salt and fresh water, were often spotted around the Bahamas. Unlike other sharks, they could be unpredictable and were responsible for more attacks on humans than any other species. Their stocky build, powerful jaws, and strong swimming abilities made them particularly dangerous, especially when provoked or when food was scarce. As the boat anchored near a reef, the group eagerly jumped into the water, their snorkels and fins ready for the adventure. David and Emma were among the first to dive in, marveling at the bright coral and colorful fish that swarmed below. It felt surreal. Everything was peaceful, the ocean calm, and the group spread out around the reef, enjoying the underwater scenery. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. The group stayed relatively close, with the guides watching from the boat. But David, lost in the reef's beauty and unaware of the increasing distance between him and the others, had unknowingly drifted away. Engrossed in watching a school of fish, Emma hadn't noticed David's slow separation from the group either. David continued exploring farther from the boat's safety and out of sight of the guides. His breathing through the snorkel was steady as he glided over the reef, unaware of the danger lurking nearby. The dark shape of a bull shark appeared below him, just beyond his line of sight. It had picked up on David's movements, drawn by his splashing and the unfamiliar presence in its territory. The shark began circling from a distance, watching David swam farther from the group, completely oblivious that he was being stalked. It happened in an instant. As David adjusted his mask, unaware of the predator below, the bull shark surged forward, propelled by its powerful tail. In the blink of an eye, the massive shark was upon him. David felt a sudden sharp pain in his right arm, and his body went rigid with shock. Looking down, he saw the terrifying sight of the bull shark's jaws clamped around his arm, its rows of razor-sharp teeth slicing through skin and muscle easily. Panic took over. David thrashed in the water, desperately trying to free himself, but the shark's grip was too strong. It pulled him under, the force of its bite dragging him beneath the surface. His lungs burned as he struggled to get free, the salt water filling his mouth as he fought to hold on to his breath. Blood clouded the water around him, feeding the shark's aggression. Still unaware of what had happened, Emma finally noticed that David was missing from the group. She lifted her head out of the water, scanning for him, and saw the thrashing in the distance. Panic seized her as she realized something was wrong. She called out to the guides, who immediately sprang into action, racing to get the boat closer to where David was struggling. Meanwhile, David was losing strength. The shark had let go of his arm but began circling him again, preparing for another strike. David, desperate and in excruciating pain, kicked out wildly, his mind racing with fear. He knew that if the shark attacked again, he might not survive. His arm was bleeding heavily, the pain nearly unbearable, but the adrenaline coursing through his body kept him moving. As the shark circled back, David grabbed the only thing he had, his snorkel. It was a weak defense, but at that moment, it was all he could think of. The shark charged again, its mouth wide open, but David struck it on the snout with the snorkel as hard as he could. Surprised by the sudden hit, the shark recoiled slightly but wasn't deterred for long. It circled again, this time closer, its eyes locked onto its target. By this time, the boat had reached David. Armed with a long pole, one of the guides leaned over the edge, shouting for David to swim toward them. The other guide grabbed a rope, ready to pull David aboard as soon as he was close enough. David, barely able to see through the blood and salt water in his eyes, kicked with every last bit of energy, his arm numb from the blood loss. The shark relentlessly followed closely behind, its dorsal fin cutting through the water as it prepared to strike again. Just as it closed in, the guide jabbed the shark with the pole, driving it back long enough for David to reach the side of the boat. The other guide pulled him aboard in one swift motion, and the group watched in stunned silence as the bull shark swam in circles below, still searching for its prey. David collapsed onto the deck, his body shaking from the shock and the pain. His arm was torn, the deep gashes from the shark's teeth a grim reminder of how close he had come to losing his life. Wide-eyed and silent, the rest of the tourists gathered around as the guides raced to stop the bleeding and radioed for emergency help. David would survive, but the scars, both physical and mental, would stay with him forever. The Bahamas, once a place of beauty and adventure, had shown its darker side, and David knew he would never forget the terror of staring into the eyes of a bull shark. It was a warm, quiet morning on August 12, 2001 in Boca Palms, a small coastal town in Florida. The beaches were mostly empty at this hour, with the sun just beginning to rise. For Eric Taylor, a 33-year-old local, this was his favorite time to swim. The water was calm, the air cool, and he enjoyed the peaceful solitude before the beach filled with people. Over the years, he had made this early morning dip a routine, often swimming alone in the shallow waters just off the coast. Eric parked his car and walked down the beach, feeling the sand between his toes as he headed toward the water. He wasn't a competitive swimmer, but strong and confident in the ocean. He had grown up by the beach, and the sea was like a second home. He waded into the water, sighing as the coolness refreshed him from the heat. There was no wind, no signs of danger, just the endless stretch of water inviting him farther out. Florida's waters were home to many sharks, though attacks were rare. Lemon sharks frequented these waters and were usually non-aggressive and avoided human contact, but they were also territorial. Lemon sharks were often hunted in the shallow waters where Eric was now swimming. Though they were not typically a threat, their powerful jaws could cause serious harm if provoked or threatened. As Eric swam out farther, unaware of the potential danger, he focused on his strokes, gliding smoothly through the water. He had the whole ocean to himself, or so he thought. The lemon shark lurking nearby, invisible beneath the surface, wasn't initially interested in attacking. It was simply moving through its territory, keeping to itself. But the swimmer's presence had caught its attention. Sharks, like many creatures of the sea, react based on instinct, and in this moment, the shark saw Eric as a possible threat to its space. The morning sun reflected on the water as Eric turned onto his back, floating momentarily to enjoy the stillness. His eyes closed, lost in the rhythm of the ocean's movement. He felt safe, unaware that the lemon shark was getting closer just below him, circling slowly, its dark silhouette blending with the sea floor. The sudden force hit Eric before he could even process what was happening. A sharp pain shot through his right leg as something latched onto him with crushing force. His body stiffened, and his instincts kicked in. This was no wave or cramp. It was something alive, powerful, and dangerous. As he twisted in the water, Eric saw the large, unmistakable shape of a lemon shark, its teeth buried deep into his leg. The pain was unbearable, a burning sensation as the shark's jaws tightened. Eric's scream through the ocean's vastness swallowed the sound. He flailed in the water, trying to break free, but the shark wasn't letting go. Its grip was firm, dragging him under as it thrashed, its powerful body moving with terrifying speed. Desperation took over as Eric punched and kicked at the shark with everything he had. His fists slammed into the shark's snout, a spot he knew could be sensitive. And for a brief second, the shark released him. Blood filled the water around him, and Eric's vision blurred as he tried to swim away, his legs searing with pain. But before he could get far, the shark returned, its predatory instincts kicking in as it closed in for another attack. The shark's teeth grazed his thigh this time, slicing through flesh but not clamping down as hard. Eric kicked out again, his foot connecting with the shark's side, pushing it away just enough to give him a chance to escape. His arms and legs moved frantically, pulling him toward the shore, the taste of salt water and blood heavy in his mouth. He could see the beach now, but it seemed impossibly far as the panic and pain coursed through his body. On the beach, a few early risers had noticed the commotion. A woman walking her dog had seen the splashing and the unusual movements in the water. Realizing something was wrong, she began shouting for help. Another man, a jogger, sprinted toward the water, knowing that whoever was out there didn't have much time. Eric's strength was fading fast. His leg felt on fire, and every stroke was a battle to keep himself afloat. He glanced back, fearing the shark would come for him again, but for now, it had disappeared into the depths. He didn't know if it would return, but he had no time to think about it. His only focus was on reaching the shore. When Eric finally felt the sand beneath his hands, he collapsed onto the beach, gasping for air. His leg was mangled, blood pouring from the deep gashes where the shark had bitten him. The jogger and the woman rushed to his side, frantically calling for an ambulance. Eric's body trembled as the shock began to set in, his mind racing as he replayed the attack in his head, trying to make sense of it. As the beach filled with onlookers, many stood in stunned silence, staring at the blood-streaked water where the shark had attacked. They couldn't believe what had just happened. For Eric, the physical pain was overwhelming, but the mental scars would last far longer. The ocean, once a place of peace for him, had become a nightmare in seconds. Eric survived the attack, but his leg would never fully heal, the bite leaving deep scars both on his skin and in his memory. He would later tell the story of that day, describing the terror he felt as the shark dragged him under and his helplessness in the face of such a powerful predator. The waters of Boca Palms remained beautiful, but for Eric, they always reminded him of how quickly nature could turn on you. He never swam alone again. In March 2001, college students, including John Andrews and Nicole White, chose Volusia County, Florida, as their spring break destination. Excited for a week of sun and sand, they looked forward to a break from university life. Unbeknownst to Michael Carter, he was also unwittingly selected as the target for their planned prank. The group chose a stretch of secluded beach away from the crowds. It was perfect for campfires at night and other daring adventures. The group was spirited as they set up camp beneath a starlit sky. The ocean was whispering only a few steps from their tents. On the third night, as the ocean breeze carried laughter from the group, Nicole, with a mischievous smile and twinkling eyes, suggested a harmless joke to make the evening memorable for Michael. Feeling adventurous, the group eagerly agreed. Always good-natured, Michael soon found himself at the center of a prank that would shift from fun to terror. Michael was absorbed in making s'mores, unaware of the whispered plots around him. They blindfolded him and pretended it was a joke before leading him to the water, where they gave him a little scare, pretending to push. They knew Michael would laugh off the joke, so they blindfolded him and led him to the water. Emily tied a bandana over Michael's eyes as they walked along the beach. She laughed as she assured him he would love what was coming. Guided by the hands of his friends, Michael laughed and joked, unaware that he was perilously close to the edge of the ocean. John pretended to stumble as he pushed Michael into the shallow waves. The group laughed, expecting Michael to join in. The situation quickly took a horrific turn. Michael's splashes grew frantic as he struggled to gain his footing, when a prominent shadowy figure appeared near Michael under the water's surface. The innocent laughter on the shore abruptly stopped. The commotion in the water and the shark's thrashing likely attracted the shark. As the reality of their danger dawned, panic replaced laughter. John was the first to react, his shouts of "shark" paralyzing the group with fear. However, the urgency of the situation quickly spurred them into action. Kevin, the first to recover, entered the water and urged Michael to remain calm. Simultaneously, Nicole, who recovered quickly, ran to their camp to grab a life buoy. Despite his fear, Kevin's voice remained steady as he reassured Michael, telling him to keep still while they worked to get him out. They threw the buoy towards Michael when Nicole returned with it. Kevin was the first to reach him and helped him hold on tightly to the buoy. They began to pull Michael back toward shore together, coordinated and desperate. The shark drew closer, its dorsal fin cutting through the water menacingly. Emily and John worked together on the shore, their combined strength slowly overcoming the ocean's pull. As they dragged Michael toward safety, everyone held their breath. a mixture of fear and hope hanging in the cool evening air. They finally pulled Michael away from the water's edge and onto the sand. His laughter was gone, and he began to breathe heavily, relieved. They collapsed in front of him. Their prank had turned into a potentially life-threatening situation. The weight of the possible loss hung heavy in the air as they tried to calm their racing hearts. Michael lay on the sand beach, trying to catch his breath as the realization of his near-death experience sank in. The group gathered around him, the bonfire crackling in the background starkly contrasted with the fear and coldness that had just enveloped them. Faces paled under the moonlight as the friends remained silent. Each was lost in their thoughts. Nicole kneeled beside Michael with her hand on his shoulders, her voice barely audible, overwhelmed with guilt. Michael, clearly shaken, slowly sat back up and nodded in understanding. They were all too aware of the shark's shadow, a reminder of how fragile their joy had been. Kevin, who had been instrumental in pulling Michael to safety, paced along the water's edge, scanning the waves seriously, emphasizing the need for caution. Emily wrapped her arms around herself and nodded in agreement, sticking to more straightforward, safer activities like light hiking, beach games, and sunbathing, avoiding further scares. The ever-organized man John grabbed his phone and checked local shark activity warnings. He read aloud from an article dated the previous weekend about sightings in the area. They should have checked before deciding to go for a night swim or play any water prank. They agreed. A new pact was born from the terror of that night. The friends decided to spend the rest of their holiday strengthening their friendships while respecting the environment and its dangers. The following days went by without incident. The group played volleyball, visited local attractions, and told stories around a bonfire, this time keeping a respectful distance away from the edge of the water. Michael's experience became a lesson to them all. It reminded them of the importance and necessity of safety. Kevin suggested a final gathering around the fire on their last evening while packing their things. His tone was joyful and sad as he proposed finishing the trip on a good note. The warmth of the fire battled against the cold ocean breeze. John proposed a toast, raising his bottle in a gesture of camaraderie. As the glasses clinked together, smiles spread among the friends, each feeling grateful for a bond that had not only endured trials, but had grown stronger. The following day, as they left the beach, the sun rose above the ocean and painted the skies in shades of orange and rose. They were not blind to the beauty of this scene. The scene starkly contrasted with the dark and fearful night they had just experienced. It served as a reminder to them of both nature's beauty and peril. On the way back to school, they discussed their next vacation, this time in the mountains, to escape the unpredictable ocean. The laughter was back, but with a new appreciation for nature's forces and the unintended effects of a simple joke. Michael hugged his friends as they said goodbye. He laughed, but his smile was genuine and wiser. They laughed and agreed wholeheartedly. Their ordeal was behind them, but not forgotten. The night was cold and dense with fog in late autumn of 2003, off the rugged coasts of Western Australia. The Sea Whisper, a fishing vessel, navigated cautiously through thick fog. Her lights barely cut through the white blanket that covered the sea. Captain Peter Walsh and his 4-member crew were returning home from a successful but exhausting fishing trip. The mood aboard the Sea Whisper was subdued. After days at sea, the crew was tired, including Liam O'Connor as first mate, Sarah Jensen as engineer, James McAllister, and Thomas Reed. The crew was eager to reach their home port before dawn and enjoy the warmth of their families. The crew was jolted out of their trance as the boat hummed along the still waters. The ship had hit something huge in the water. It wasn't a floating log or debris. A series of frantic bangs were heard against the hull after the impact. Captain Walsh's command echoed through the fog as he ordered the crew to activate the lights and investigate their collision. Liam swiftly grabbed a spotlight from the deck and aimed it toward the port side. His hands remained steady despite the rush of adrenaline. The light revealed a terrifying sight, a giant scaled shark thrashing in the water, its tail delivering powerful swipes against the hull of the Sea Whisper. The crew reacted with horror at the sight as the propeller of their vessel sliced the shark's dorsal. The animal's confusion and pain were palpable. Its dark eyes rolled wildly in the water as it struggled. Sarah's voice was tense as she pleaded for them to get away. noting that the agitated creature could cause further damage to the boat. Thomas was told to change their course by Captain Walsh, who nodded. As they tried to steer clear of the injured shark, it became apparent that the shark would not let them go quickly. It followed, with its tail beating furiously in the water, fueled by pain and aggression. James felt a chill down his spine as he watched the shark's relentless pursuit. Half to himself and half to anyone listening, he muttered that it seemed like the shark had a score to settle. The fog thickened as the Sea Whisper, trying to outrun an injured shark, drove forward. Visibility was reduced to almost nothing. The only sounds that could be heard were the thrashing of the shark and the struggling engine of the boat. Captain Walsh instructed calmly but firmly to keep the boat steady. They could not stop there. They needed to head to more transparent water in an attempt to lose the pursuing creature. The Sea Whisper, however, was in poor condition. Sarah went below to check the engine, hoping it would last until they reached safe waters. The crew was still on deck, and their eyes were straining to see through the fog. They were looking for any sign of the shark's next move. The tension was palpable as each wave crashed against the boat's hull. Each sound of water breaking on the hull served as a warning of the predator that lurked just out of sight. The crew was pinned between the merciless sea and the mariner's curse as the night went on. The situation aboard Sea Whisper became increasingly dangerous as the night went on. The fog thickened and enveloped the boat, dampening all hope for escape. Driven by instinct and pain, the shark continued to pursue the ship, with each attack more aggressive than the previous. Captain Walsh stood at the helm with his eyes fixed on instruments and a grim determination to navigate through the dense fog. The cold air was filled with rhythmic thuds as the shark's body crashed into the boat. Sarah looked worried when she returned from the engine. Although the engine held up for the moment, the strain from outrunning the shark had taken its toll. Fuel gauges were dropping faster than usual, a testament to their desperate flight through treacherous water. She informed the captain they could only keep up with this pace longer. They were burning fuel rapidly and the engine was overheating. Captain Walsh nodded with his jaw set. "We need a new strategy. We cannot outrun it, but we can outsmart him." Captain Walsh quickly gathered his crew and devised a dangerous strategy. The remaining flares on the boat would distract the sharks and give them enough time to escape to a nearby cove they had already passed. The shallow water of the cove made it unsuitable for sharks. Despite the tension, Liam and Thomas prepared flares with their hands still steady. On Captain Walsh's command, they fired the first flare in the night sky. The light arced across the water and landed a few meters away from the boat. Attracted by the sudden flash of light, the shark veered away from its course to follow the flare. Captain Walsh took advantage of this distraction and steered Sea Whisper towards the cove. The boat was lurching forward as the engine groaned under the strain. They were desperate to get to safety. The water slowed as they approached, and the bottom was visible through the fog clearing. When the shark realized its prey had escaped into less navigable water, it launched a final and furious attack on the boat. The Sea Whisper was shook violently from the bow to the stern. As the boat shuddered, everyone braced and grabbed onto anything they could. The massive shark scraped the boat's hull as its movements became more frantic. With great effort, Captain Walsh maneuvered his boat into the middle of the cove, where the water level was too low for the shark's attack to continue. The shark could not continue its attack and lingered on the cove's edge. It circled before turning around and disappearing into deeper waters. As tensions finally subsided, the Sea Whisper crew heaved a collective sigh. The crew of the Sea Whisper was safe for the moment, as they anchored themselves in the shallow cove. As dawn approached, the fog lifted and revealed the beautiful coastline. The crew enjoyed their surroundings as the sun rose, casting a golden glow on the water. They had been tested, and the ordeal strengthened their bonds. It also deepened their respect for sea creatures and the ocean. Captain Walsh turned to his crew and saw their faces, tired but grateful. He told them to secure the boat and then rest, acknowledging that they had earned it. The Sea Whisper crew and she remained in the cove as the sun rose, with the events of that night serving as a reminder of ocean unpredictability and the beauty and danger of their marine world. It was the summer of 2012. The sun shone over the Florida Keys and an amber light spilled across the turquoise waters. The small islands, full of multicolor coral reefs and varied fishes, were a great attraction for families aiming at adventures combined with relaxation. The Roberts had joined in and rented an extra-large yacht for the occasion. It would be a festive family reunion with everyone having a lovely time. But just under the surface, it was boiling over. Jack Thompson, the brash 25-year-old with a penchant for recklessness, always felt that his grandmother, Evelyn Roberts, nitpicked about everything. The septuagenarian Evelyn was sharp-tongued and fiercely independent, which earned her respect throughout the years and rendered her somewhat of a target for Jack's youthful arrogance. The years had soured their relationship, filling it with petty arguments and stubborn disagreements. The family had gathered, laughing and chattering on deck as the yacht bobbed gently in the waves. Fishy smells wafted from the tiny galley, but not everyone wanted to celebrate. Jack and Evelyn stood opposite the deck, exchanging heated glances across a room thick with unspoken words. Evelyn had just remarked upon the ludicrousness of Jack's swim trunks while wearing a favorite sun hat, worn everywhere and bejeweled with colorful flowers. Jack, feeling publicly humiliated before his cousins, snapped back a retort about her age and how she should act her age. It hung there, heavy and charged. Her face turned red with anger as Jack felt a surge of defiance. Determined to do so, Jack pushed Evelyn with a mighty shove, but halfway wanted her to stagger a few at least, tumble backward, and regain her position by getting up and back on her feet. Instead, she lost her balance and plunged headlong over the edge of the yacht with flailing arms into the water beneath them. The family gasped collectively and ran to the edge, their expressions filled with horror as they looked on. Little did Jack know then that the bull sharks, a very aggressive species that usually find themselves in more shallow coastal waters, were prowling underneath the yacht. The baiting fish and other marine animals have drawn these sharks into the middle of the area. Evelyn surfaced. She spluttered, shocked, the unmistakable silhouettes of sharks beginning to circle her. Shock turned to panic within the family. Jack's heart raced as he watched the scene, now fully realizing the gravity of what he had just done. Hitherto, he had just crossed the line and his grandmother was in danger now. His cousins shouted instructions at him, pulling life rings and poles from the deck and throwing them toward Evelyn, desperate to rescue her. Evelyn fought to keep her head above water, instinct setting in at the memory of years of swimming lessons and how tough she was. The sharks, however, were attracted by the commotion, a part of fear and guilt mixed in Jack. He couldn't bear seeing his grandmother getting eaten. He dived in head first. The cold water shocked him, and his heart throbbed with adrenaline at the sudden temperature change. Shock led to this cold shaking of water, but he quickly focused on Evelyn, now thrashing about in a panic. Jack swam towards her, pushing aside his fear of the circling sharks. He knew he had to reach her before it was too late. As he reached Evelyn, the shadows of the sharks swelled to engulf them, their dorsal fins slicing the water with a sinister purpose. He shouted for her to go for him, but the call was smothered in the cacophony of splashing water before her. There was a fight for breath within Evelyn, but finally, she saw Jack and reached out. At the same time, he yanked her arm toward him. The water swirled the edges of them. Even as the family watched, horrified, not cheering him on, quiet, not wanting to do anything to influence Jack, they also flung the life rings and poles nearer to the two floundering figures in the water. He could feel the moment pressing down on him, but Jack focused on getting Evelyn to safety. He stroked powerfully to pull them both to the nearest life ring. Evelyn seized Jack's arm, her fear palpable. The shark still circled, sharp, quick movements that spoke of predators. Jack's mind raced as he tried to work out their next moves. At last, they reached the life ring, and Jack wrapped an arm around it, pulling Evelyn to him. He raised his eyes to his family, who were leaning out over the side of the yacht, hope and horror written across their faces. They had managed to maneuver a pole within his reach. With one hand gripping the life ring and the other gripping the pole, he signaled for somebody to do something. Amid the cries, they worked with one accord, pulling Jack and Evelyn toward the yacht side using the pole. The sharks felt the commotion when approaching the side and probably got bored, disappearing off toward the deeper waters. The family finally gave in to relief to pull Evelyn and Jack to the top deck. Breathless and shaken, Jack hauled himself over the side of the yacht with his grandmother. Immediately, water streamed from Evelyn's mouth as she coughed and sputtered. Jack collapsed on his knees beside her in safety, panic and guilt flooding over him. He had never been so scared and regretted anything as much as he did then. Evelyn was still gasping for breath when she turned to Jack in disbelief and anger. The family closed in around them, checking for any injuries, but emotional ones ran more profound than any flesh wound. Jack could see the disappointment in their eyes, and that stung more than any shark bite. As the adrenaline wore off, so did the shock. With her strength returning, Evelyn sat up and glared at Jack. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the low gurgle of the waves against the yacht. Jack knew he deserved her anger. He had just placed his grandmother directly in harm's way, and the realization was unbearable. In the following days, the family tried to recover from what happened. Jack tried to earn everyone back by doing all the chores and listening to Evelyn's stories, which he used to tune out. He realized the ocean can be beautiful and a formidable force, like family bonds. The experience saw them bond closer, both realizing how fragile life was. Jack and Evelyn started understanding each other. They even laughed together about their narrowly missed disaster. Jack did learn that the ocean is mighty and deserves respect. Evelyn softened, and for the first time began to appreciate her grandson, who was working to make amends. As they stood on the deck meeting again for the next time, a few years afterward, laughter rang out across the water. Jack and Evelyn exchanged glances, knowing they had been through so much and had come out stronger for it. The Florida Keys served as a backdrop for adventure and all the encounters. Love, forgiveness, and some of life's harsh realities. Summer 2013 was spent in the Bahamas with crystalline waters and immensely colorful marine life. Situated in the Caribbean, this archipelago featured breathtaking coral reefs filled with fish of any color, and the most unusual underwater landscapes. At the age of 35, Mike Anderson was a very enthusiastic snorkeler. He had made his forays into the Bahamas for years. Each trip was a chance to plunge him into the determined sea depth, into the great mystery that fused with him to establish a close relationship with nature. His enthusiasm flickered like fire, and he was all set to have yet another snorkeling experience. In his bright blue jumpsuit, strapping on all his snorkel gear with the sun glinting off the shiny equipment, he felt like a superhero, ready to venture into the wonders beneath the waves. When Mike slipped into the water, he was bombarded by color and life. Schools of fish swam about, glinting in the sunlight and lighting up the coral formations like 1,000 tiny jewels. The sea plants swayed gently in the ocean currents, performing a shimmering dance. He floated, taking deep breaths, allowing the ocean's quiet to sink into his skull. Little did he know that this peaceful adventure would turn dark on him. Mike locked onto a flash of movement far ahead as he drifted along. That intrigued his heart, and he swam faster, excited to see that strange movement being created. He realized it was a big, great barracuda as he got closer. Its slim body was slicing the water with the grace of something almost predatory. Its silver skin pulled the sun's light from above and drew his eye to it, nearly as if he were a moth to that flame. Initially, Mike felt awe regarding the barracuda and its pointed beauty, complete with razor-sharp teeth glinting ominously. But as the barracuda swam closer, Mike's fascination turned to unease. He could feel the creature's eyes on him, the black pupils locked onto the shiny objects of his snorkel gear. The barracuda began to circle him lazily. What seemed slow, deliberate motions caused Mike to believe he was being sized up for the kill. Mike's heart pounded with memories of stories shared by fellow snorkeling buddies that barracudas were attracted to shiny, reflective things that they mistook for food. A surge of panic filled him as he realized his predicament fully. The calm waters he was comfortable with a moment ago were like an ominous death trap closing on him in stealth. He struggled with his nerves, realizing he could easily provoke the fish. Mike began swimming back to his boat with purposeful strokes, which rested a short distance away on the surface. He carefully kept his movements slow and sure, trying not to turn his head with the tension of the barracuda. With tension like that, each flick of his fins seemed magnified as the atmosphere hung thick with water. The big barracuda circled repeatedly, each sweep closer to Mike than the last. Its sharp, razor-edged teeth glinted in the sunlight, and Mike wondered if he had miscalculated the fish's curiosity, or if it was hungry. He quickly focused on the boat, visualizing climbing aboard and escaping the situation. But the constant fear gnawed at his insides. As he swam, Mike's mind was filled with thoughts about the oceanic predators he had always admired from afar. Though he had read many books and seen most of the marine habitats in documentaries on television, nothing came close to experiencing it. Here he was, a trespasser on the barracuda's home ground, with a fair measure of respect for the creature as he quaked with fear. Every stroke was heavier than the preceding one, and consequently the distance that separated him from the boat appeared interminable. Mike increased the frequency of his panting, his heart beating uncontrollably. The barracuda felt behind him, its dark shadow hanging in the deep. He resisted the temptation to look behind him. He knew it only served to increase his anxiety. Almost immediately, the barracuda approached again, closer than before. He felt his instincts surge and kicked harder, thrashing his body through the water with increased emergency. But the fish didn't give in. It shredded the waves with its lean body, coming closer after each pass. Mike's mind raced as he remembered stories of snorkelers who said that a barracuda, marginally mishmash, had confronted them. Finally, he reached the boat's side, where he clung to the ladder with trembling fingers. Not daring to let go, he caught his breath, peering toward the barracuda. Thankfully, it had stopped its pursuit and hung a few feet away, almost as if Mike's sudden rising stupefied it. Mike could see the glint of sharp teeth, but no attack was visible. Maybe it did not care or was waiting for his next attempt. One final heave had him on board and gasping, with adrenaline running at the speed of a racehorse. He fell flat on the deck face down, gasping for breath. The magnitude of the encounter came crashing down on him. The dark shadow of the barracuda circled beneath the boat as an ominous reminder. He was momentarily frightened and awed simultaneously. He had escaped, but not without a new regard for the ocean's predators. He lay on the deck, feeling the sun's warmth seeping into his skin as Mike reflected on what had happened. He had seen how quickly the calm beauty of the ocean could turn into an emergency. He knows the barracuda had responded out of its environment and was driven by instinct, something Mike had to acknowledge. That incident would forever change how he viewed snorkeling and the sea. Days later, returning home to the Bahamas, he once more felt attracted to the waters where he had met the great barracuda. This time, he entered the ocean reverently, thankful for the lessons he had learned. He had learned a deep appreciation for the beauty of the sea and its hidden dangers. Grinning, he floated there in the warm waters of the Bahamas, thanking the journey that had turned him into this snorkeler.